Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 6.15, Middle East Policies. It includes information that aligns with the second section on your Unit 6 study guide. Now remember, you have control over this lecture. Make sure you're using your study guide to figure out what's important, pause if you need to write things down, and bring any questions you have to class. Let's go ahead and get started. As you learned in the last set of notes, a new president took office in 2001, George W. Bush. The son of a former president, he entered office amid controversy and dealt with many issues while he was president. But none of the issues he faced were as impactful to the country as the terrorist attack on the U.S. on September 11th, 2001. That's what we're going to look at today. Not just that attack, but the history that led up to that attack. Now, the U.S. had experienced strained relations with many Middle Eastern Arab nations ever since the end of World War II and the creation of Israel by Great Britain. While most of this strain did not carry over into American policies during the Cold War, we really began to see a shift as the Cold War eased and changed. Remember, in 1973, OPEC placed an oil embargo on the U.S. and other countries in retaliation for supporting Israel against the Palestinians in the Yom Kippur War. And in 1978, the U.S. was pivotal in creating a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt in the Camp David Accords. Now, that didn't create peace within the Middle East, and it actually increased negative feelings of many Middle Eastern countries towards the U.S. Then the following year, the Iran hostage crisis occurred. That further strained relations between the U.S. and Iran. So as time went on, more and more actions between the Middle Eastern countries and the U.S. became hostile and violent. Acts of terrorism replaced less violent, aggressive acts seen in earlier years. These actions occurred throughout the 1980s and the 1990s. In 1983, a Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon was bombed with a truck bomb. 241 American servicemen and 58 French military personnel were killed when two trucks filled with explosives were detonated near the sleeping quarters of the U.S.-French base. And terrorist groups, not governments, were the ones claiming responsibility for the attacks. Now that demonstrated a change in foreign relations. Presidents and ambassadors couldn't talk with or negotiate with this unknown enemy, so the attacks continued. Terrorism continued, and the focus was not necessarily on a specific country or specifically on the U.S., but really often it was on Westerners in general, so the U.S. and Europe. Acts like the TWA flight that was taken hostage in Lebanon in 1985. The terrorists held the passengers captive for 2 weeks on the plane until some of their demands were met. There were others like the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103, also known as the Lockerbie bombing, which destroyed a plane as it crossed Scotland heading from Germany to Detroit. This act, which happened in 1988, killed all 259 people on board and 11 people on the ground in Lockerbie, Scotland. The U.S. did not stay completely neutral towards these acts. In 1990, America sent troops and missiles to help Kuwait fight against Iraq in the Operation Desert Storm, which was also known as the Persian Gulf War. This war, which lasted from 1990 to 91, was an attempt for the U.S. to gain allies in the Middle East, but it actually hurt the U.S. relationship with many countries in the Middle East. Then in 93, the attacks became even more personal for the U.S. because the first Middle Eastern terrorist attack occurred on U.S. soil. A truck filled with explosives was parked in the underground parking garage of the World Trade Center in New York City. When it detonated, it destroyed the underground structure, killing 6 people, and it injured over 1,000 others. Now, the goal had been to cause the entire tower to fall and hit the other tower, which would have killed tens of thousands of people. Now, it failed in its overall goal, but it did create chaos, and it really caused Americans to question their safety at home. All of these eventually led to the terrorist attack on September 11th, 2001, often just referred to as 9/11. On this day, airplanes full of passengers were turned into weapons. 2 of them were flown into the World Trade Center towers in New York City. 1 was flown into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and one was crashed by the passengers in a field in Pennsylvania in order to stop it from reaching its intended target in Washington, D.C. This was a defining moment in U.S. history and in our Middle Eastern policy. America, after years of buildup, declared a war on terror and changed our focus from human rights violations to protection of our own rights and citizens. Now, while many Americans say that we had no idea an attack was coming, there was definitely a history of violence and terrorism between the U.S. and Middle Eastern groups. This history culminated in the 9/11 attack and changed America. And with that, this is the end of U.S. Note 6.15. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in class with any questions you have.